Brazil is not South America, and here's why. Culturally, historically, psychologically, Brazil doesn't always feel like the rest of South America. It might share the same continent, it might share the same map, but it doesn't always share the same rhythm. Brazil often feels fundamentally different from its neighbors. Different in language, different in history, different in mindset. So the question is not where Brazil is located. The real question is, why does it feel like it stands apart? Most people miss this. Brazil is the only Portuguese-speaking country on the continent. The country once had an emperor while surrounding nations formed republics. It received more enslaved Africans than any other country in America. This is nearly half the landmass of South America. If you're curious about how history, culture, and geography shape nations, make sure to subscribe. This channel breaks down the deeper stories behind the map. But here's where it gets interesting. Is Brazil simply one country among many in South America? Or is Brazil something separate that grew besides the rest of South America? In this documentary, we will look at the historical, demographic, political, and cultural forces that shaped Brazil. By the end of this video, you'll see this map differently. Brazil's story begins in Europe, not in South America. It started with a single decision. In 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. This agreement divided newly discovered territories between the two empires. An imaginary line was drawn across the Atlantic world. Everything west belonged to Spain. Everything east belonged to Portugal. That line cut through what would later become South America. Most of the continent developed under Spanish rule. The eastern portion became Portuguese territory. That territory evolved into Brazil. For more than 3 centuries, Brazil was ruled from Lisbon. Spanish-speaking regions were governed from Madrid. This meant different legal codes, different land ownership systems, different trade relationships, different administrative cultures. When countries finally became free, they didn't all begin the same way. And Brazil's story was different right from the start. One empire changed how millions speak. Nearly every South American country speaks Spanish. Brazil speaks Portuguese. At first, this might seem like a small detail, but language shapes identity in powerful ways. Spanish sounds sharp. Brazilian Portuguese sounds fluid. Even the rhythm of speech feels different. Sharing the same language makes it easy for Spanish-speaking countries in South America to share culture, media, and political ideas. But Brazil is different, because it speaks Portuguese. Over time, Brazilian Portuguese changed and became unique. It also added many words from the native people who lived there first, like abacaxi for pineapple, mandioca for cassava, and even place names like Paranha and Iguacu. It included African rhythms and expressions. The tone and rhythm of Brazilian Portuguese feel distinct even within the Portuguese-speaking world. Language also shapes regional integration. Trade, diplomacy, and media exchange are often smoother among countries that share a common language. Brazil's different language makes it feel a little apart from its neighbors. To understand this country, you have to understand its past. The real transformation wasn't economic, it was political. In the early 19th century, much of Spanish America experienced violent wars of independence. These conflicts were long and often led to separation. But Brazil's path was different. When Napoleon conquered Portugal, the Portuguese royal family relocated to Rio de Janeiro. For over a decade, Brazil functioned as the seat of the Portuguese Empire. Unlike the rest of Latin America, Brazil chose a different path. In 1822, Pedro I announced that Brazil was no longer ruled by Portugal. But Brazil did not become a republic right away. It became an empire instead. While other countries in the region were divided and fighting each other, Brazil stayed together under one ruler. This unity helped Brazil stay strong over time. Brazil's identity was built more on continuity than on dramatic change, and that early political path still shapes the country today. To understand Brazil, you first have to understand its size. From rainforests to megacities, one nation. Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world by land area. It covers nearly half of South America. It borders almost every other country on the continent. It contains most of the Amazon River system. The country has huge areas for agriculture and rich natural resources. With a population of more than 200 million, Brazil is demographically dominant in the region. Scale creates options. Smaller nations usually depend on regional cooperation to survive economically. But Brazil has a big internal market and rich natural resources. That gives it more freedom to act on its own. As a result, Brazil often plays a leading role in the region, and that influences how Brazil is viewed at home and abroad. To understand Brazil, you have to understand Africa's role. Millions crossed the ocean and changed Brazil forever. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, Brazil received more enslaved Africans than any other country in America. Over 4 million people arrived there, not by choice. The arrival of so many people changed Brazil's culture forever. In cities like Salvador, African traditions became a big part of everyday life. Religions such as candomblé mixed African beliefs with Catholic ideas. Cultural practices like capoeira show stories of struggle and survival. Music and festivals, especially in Rio de Janeiro, also show strong African influence. African heritage exists throughout South America, but in Brazil, it became a central part of the country, not just a small influence. Brazil's identity was shaped by a mix of three groups: Europeans, indigenous people, and Africans. This large mix of cultures is a big reason why Brazil feels so unique. If Africa shaped Brazil's soul, immigration reshaped its face. Immigration helped define modern Brazil. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Brazil experienced major immigration waves. Large numbers arrived from Italy and Germany. Brazil also became home to the largest Japanese community outside Japan. In cities like Sao Paulo, this diversity is visible in architecture, cuisine, and social structure. Brazil didn't blend into South America, it layered over it. Immigration shaped much of South America, but in Brazil, it reshaped the nation itself. Brazil isn't one culture, it's many cultures interacting. Culture became Brazil's bridge to the world. The world fell in love with Brazil's energy. Brazil's global image is strongly tied to rhythm, football, and celebration. Sports legends like Pelé became international symbols of creativity and excellence. Football in Brazil is art. Festivals and music styles have traveled worldwide. Brazil shows strong cultural confidence. This shapes how people in other countries see it. Compared to countries like Argentina or Chile, Brazil is often seen as more expressive and more relaxed. These ideas don't fully explain how complex Brazil really is, but they highlight how different it feels. Sharing its culture abroad also helps Brazil feel more united internally. Who is Brazil, really? National identity is built from memory, culture, and belief. In Brazil, people often talk about something called jeitinho. It simply means finding a way. When something doesn't work, you don't give up, you look for another path. You talk to people, you stay creative, you make it work, somehow. Brazil is a huge country with many different people and ways of life. Things can be complicated, rules can feel slow. So over time, people learn to rely on flexibility instead of strict systems. This way of living shapes everyday life. It makes people more relaxed, more social, more open to conversation. Problems are often solved through relationships, not just paperwork. There is a strong sense of warmth and human connection. Of course, this can sometimes make things less predictable. Plans may change, things may take longer, but that mix, creativity, adaptability, warmth, and spontaneity is part of the Brazilian lifestyle. It's not just about solving problems, it's about how life is lived, and that feeling is deeply Brazilian. It was never about being bigger, it was about being different. Brazil is part of South America, but it developed differently. Geography draws borders. History builds identity. Brazil is not different by coincidence, it is different by design. And when we recognize that, we begin to understand not just Brazil, but how nations everywhere grow into something uniquely their own. Subscribe for more deep dives like this. See you soon.